Every science begins as philosophy and ends as art.
There it is. That's what I've been needing. I knew it was somewhere. It's in the story of philosophy.
Hypothetical interpretation of the unknown, as in metaphysics, or the inexactly known, as in ethics or political philosophy. It is the front trench in the siege of truth. Science is the captured territory, and behind it are those secure regions in which knowledge and art build our imperfect and marvelous world. Philosophy seems to stand still, perplexed, but only because she leaves the fruits of victory to her daughters, the sciences, and herself passes on, divinely discontent, to the uncertain. Science is analytical description. Philosophy is synthetic interpretation. Science wishes to resolve the whole into parts, the organism into organs, the obscure into the known. It does not inquire into the values and ideal possibilities of things, nor into their total and final significance. It is content to show their present actuality and operation. It narrows its gaze resolutely to the nature and process of things as they are. The scientist is as impartial as nature in Turgenev's poem. He is as interested in the leg of a flea as in the creative prose of a genius. But the philosopher is not content to describe the fact. He wishes to ascertain its relation to experience in general, and thereby to get at its meaning and its worth. He combines things and interprets its synthesis. He tries to put together, better than before, that
now time because when I fucking said that to the vampire, it was like, oh,
science tells us how to heal and
they all
how
like,
to
and turn around like that.
great and weak victory over ecclesiasticism and superstition makes dead those issues which he found alive. Much of his fame, too, came of his inimitable conversation. But scripta manent verba volat, written words remain. What is left to us is too much the flesh of Voltaire, too little the divine fire of his spirit.
God
And
damn
yet,
it.
darkly as we see him through the glass of time, what a spirit! Sheer intelligence transmuting anger into fun, fire into life. A creature of air and flame, the most excitable that ever lived, composed of more ethereal and more throbbing atoms than those of other men. There is none whose mental machinery is more delicate, nor whose equilibrium is at the same time more shifting and more exact. Was he perhaps the greatest intellectual energy in all history? Certainly he worked harder and accomplished more than any other man of his epoch. Not to be occupied and not to exist amount to the same thing, he said. All people are good except those who are idle. His secretary said that he was a miser only of his time. One must give oneself all the occupation one can to make life supportable in this world. The further I advance in age, the more I find work necessary. It becomes in the long run the greatest of pleasures and takes the place of the illusions of life. If you do not want to commit suicide, always have something to do. He was ever at work. It was because he was so thoroughly alive that he filled the whole era with his life. Contemporary with one of the greatest of centuries, 1694 to 1778, he was the soul and essence of it. To name Voltaire and Victor Hugo is to characterize the entire 18th century. Italy had a Renaissance and Germany had a Reformation, but France had Voltaire. He was for his country both Renaissance and Reformation, and after Revolution. He carried on the antiseptic skepticism of Montaigne, and the healthy, earthy humor of Rabelais. He fought superstition and corruption more savagely and effectively than Luther or Erasmus, Calvin or Knox or Melanchthon. He helped to make the powder with which Mirabeau and Marat, Danton and Robespierre blew up the old regime. If we judge of men by what they have done, said Lamartine, then Voltaire is incontestably the greatest writer of modern Europe. Destiny gave him 83 years of existence that he might slowly decompose the decayed age, and to combat time, and when he fell, he was the conqueror. No, never has a writer had in his lifetime such influence. Despite exile, imprisonment, and the suppression of almost every one of his books by the minions of church and state, he forged fiercely a path for his truth, until at last kings, popes, and emperors catered to him, thrones trembled before him, and half the world listened to catch his every word. It was an age in which many things called for a destroyer. Laughing lions must come, said Nietzsche. Well, Voltaire came and annihilated with laughter. He and Rousseau were the two voices of a vast process of economic and political transition from feudal aristocracy to the rule of the middle class. When a rising class is inconvenienced by existing law or custom, it appeals from custom to reason and from law to nature, just as conflicting desires in the individual sparkle into thought. So the wealthy bourgeoisie supported the rationalism of Voltaire and the naturalism of Rousseau. It was necessary to loosen old habits and customs, to renovate and invigorate feeling and thought, to open the mind to experiment and change before the great revolution could come. Not that Voltaire and Rousseau were the causes of the revolution, perhaps rather they were co-results with it of the forces that seethed and surged beneath the political and social surface of French life. They were the accompanying light and brilliance of the volcanic heat and conflagration. Philosophy is to history as reason is to desire. In either case, an unconscious process determines from below the conscious thought above. Yet we must not bend back too far in attempting to correct the philosopher's tendency to exaggerate the influence in the works of Voltaire and Rousseau. Said, "Those two men have destroyed France. England might have preserved themselves," said Napoleon, "if they had controlled writing materials. The advent of cannon killed the feudal system. Ink will kill the modern social organization." Account. Nothing enfranchises like education, and he began to enfranchise France. When once a nation begins to think here, France began to think.
Economics is the heartbeat of history.
Voltaire, that is to say, François-Marie Arouet, was born at Paris in 1694, the son of a comfortably successful notary and a somewhat aristocratic mother. He owed to his father, perhaps, his shrewdness and irascibility, and to his mother something of his levity and wit. He came into the world, so to speak, by a narrow margin. His mother did not survive his birth, and he was so puny and sickly an infant that the nurse did not give him more than a day to live. She was slightly in error, as he lived almost to 84. But throughout his life, his frail body tormented with illness his unconquerable spirit. He had for his edification a model elder brother, Armand, a pious lad who fell in love with the Jansenist heresy and courted martyrdom for his faith. "Well," said Armand to a friend who advised the better part of valor, "if you do not want to be hanged, at least do not put off other people." The father said he had two fools for his sons, one in verse and the other in prose. The fact that Francois made verses almost as soon as he could write his name convinced his very practical father that nothing good would come of him. But the famous hetaira, Ninon de L'Enclos, who lived in the provincial town to which the Arouets had returned after the birth of Francois, saw in the youth signs of greatness, and when she died, she left him 2,000 francs for the purchase of books. His early education came from these and from a dissolute abbé, a Jérôme Coignard in the flesh, who taught him skepticism along with his prayers. His later educators, the Jesuits, gave him the very instrument of skepticism by teaching him dialectic, the art of proving anything, and therefore at last the habit of believing nothing. Francois became an adept at argument. While the boys played games in the fields, he, aged 12, stayed behind to discuss theology with the doctors. When the time came for him to earn his living, he scandalized his father by proposing to take up literature as a profession. Literature, said Monsieur Arouet, is the profession of the man who wishes to be useless to society and a burden to his relatives, and to die of hunger. One can see the table trembling under his emphasis. So Francois went in for literature. Not that he was a quiet and merely studious lad. He burned the midnight oil of others. He took to staying out late, frolicking with the wits and roisterers of the town, and experimenting with the commandments, until his exasperated father sent him off to a relative at Caen with instructions to keep the youth practically in confinement. But his jailer fell in love with his wit and soon gave him free rein. After imprisonment, now as later, came exile. His father sent him to The Hague with the French ambassador, requesting strict surveillance of the madcap boy. But Francois at once fell in love with a little lady, Pampette, held breathless clandestine interviews with her, and wrote to her passionate letters ending always with the refrain, "I shall certainly love you forever." The affair was discovered, and he was sent home. He remembered Pampette for several weeks. In 1715, proud of his 21 years, he went to Paris just in time to be in at the death of Louis XIV. The succeeding Louis being too young to govern France, much less Paris, the power fell into the hands of a regent. And during this quasi-duration, life ran riot in the capital of the world, and young ROA ran with it. He soon achieved a reputation as a brilliant and restless lad. When the regent, for economy, sold half the horses that filled the royal stables, Francois remarked how much more sensible it would have been to dismiss half the asses that filled the royal court. At last all the bright and naughty things whispered about Paris were fathered upon him, and it was his ill luck that these included 2 poems accusing the regent of desiring to usurp the throne. The regent raged, and meeting the youth in the park one day, said to him, "Monsieur ROA, I will wager that I can show you something that you have never seen before." "What is that?" "The inside of the Bastille." ROA saw it the next day, April 16, 1717. While in the Bastille, he adopted, for some unknown reason, the pen name of Voltaire, and became a poet in earnest and at length. Before he had served 11 months, he had written a long and not unworthy epic, the Henriade, telling the story of Henry of Navarre. Then the regent, having discovered perhaps that he had imprisoned an innocent man, released him and gave him a pension, whereupon Voltaire wrote thanking him for so taking care of his board, and begging permission hereafter to take care of his lodging himself. He passed now almost with a bound from the prison to the stage. His tragedy, Oedipe, was produced in 6 nights. His old father, coming to upbraid him, sat in a box and covered his joy by grumbling at every hit, "Oh, the rascal, the rascal!" When the fond Fontenelle met Voltaire after the play and damned it with high praise, saying it was too in no mood for caution or for courtesy, had he not put into the play itself these reckless lines? "Our priests are not what simple folk suppose. Their learning is but our credulity." Act 4, Scene 1. And into the mouth of a rasp, this epoch-making challenge. "Let us trust to ourselves, see all with our own eyes. Let these be our oracles, our tripods, and our gods." Act 2, Scene 5. The play netted Voltaire 4,000 francs, which he proceeded to invest with a wisdom unheard of in literary men. Through all his tribulations, he kept the art not merely of making a spacious income, but of putting it to work. He respected the classic adage that one must live before one can philosophize. In 1729, he bought up all the tickets in a poorly planned government lottery and made a large sum, much to the anger of the government. But as he became rich, he became ever more generous, and a growing circle of protégés gathered about him as he passed into the afternoon of life. It was well that he added an almost Hebraic subtlety of finance to his Gallic cleverness of pen, for his next play, Artemire, failed. Voltaire felt the failure keenly. Every triumph sharpens the sting of later defeats. He was always painfully sensitive to public opinion and envied the animals because they do not know what people say of them. Fate added to his dramatic failure a bad case of smallpox. He cured himself by drinking 120 pints of lemonade and somewhat less of physic. When he came out of the shadow of death, he found that his Henriade had made him famous. He boasted, with reason, that he had made poetry the fashion. He was received and feted everywhere. The aristocracy caught him up and turned him into a polished man of the world, an unequaled master of conversation, and the inheritor of the finest cultural tradition in Europe. For 8 years he basked in the sunshine of the salons, and then fortune turned away. Some of the aristocracy could not forget that this young man had no other title to place and honor than that of genius, and could not quite forgive him for the distinction. During a dinner at the Duc de Sully's chateau, after Voltaire had held forth for some minutes with unabashed eloquence and wit, the Chevalier de Rohan asked, not sotto voce, "Who is the young man who talks so loud?" "My lord," answered Voltaire quickly, "he is the one who does not carry a great name, but wins respect for the name he has." To answer the Chevalier at all was impertinence. To answer him unanswerably was treason. The honorable lord engaged a band of ruffians to assault Voltaire by night, merely cautioning them, "Don't hit his head. Something good may come out of that yet." The next day at the theater, Voltaire appeared, bandaged and limping. walked up to Roland's box and challenged him to a duel. Then he went home and spent all day practicing with the foils. But the noble chevalier had no mind to be precipitated into heaven or elsewhere by a mere genius. He appealed to his cousin, who was Minister of Police, to protect him. Voltaire was arrested and found himself again in his old home, the Bastille, privileged once more to view the world from the inside. He was almost immediately released on condition that he go into exile in England. He went, but after being escorted to Dover, he recrossed the Channel in disguise, burning to avenge himself. Warned that he had been discovered and was about to be arrested a third time, he took ship again and reconciled himself to 3 years in England, 1726 to 29. London, Letters on the English. He set to work with courage to master the new language. He was displeased to find that plague had 1 syllable and ague 2. He wished that plague would take 1/2 the language and ague the other half. But soon he could read English well, and within a year he was master of the best English literature of the age. He was introduced to the literati by Lord Bolingbroke, and dined with one after another of them, even with the elusive and corrosive Dean Swift. He pretended to know pedigree and asked none of others. When Congreve spoke of his own plays as trifles and desired to be considered rather a gentleman of leisure than an author, Voltaire said to him sharply, "If you had had the misfortune to be only a gentleman like any other, I should never have come to see you." What surprised him was the freedom with which Bolingbroke, Pope, Addison, and Swift wrote whatever they pleased. Here was a people that had opinions of its own, a people that had remade its religion, hanged its king, imported another, and built a parliament stronger than any ruler in Europe. There was no Bastille here, and no lettre de cachet by which titled pensioners or royal idlers could send their untitled foes to jail without cause and without trial. Here were 13 religions and not 1 priest. Here was the boldest sect of all, the Quakers, who astonished all Christendom by behaving like Christians. Voltaire never to the end of his life ceased to wonder at them. In the Dictionnaire Philosophique, he makes one of them say, "Our God, who has bidden us love our enemies and suffer evil without complaint, assuredly has no mind that we should cross the sea to go and cut the throats of our brothers, because murderers in red clothes and hats 2 feet high enlist citizens by making a noise with 2 sticks on an ass's skin." It was an England, too, that throbbed with a virile intellectual activity. Bacon's name was still in the air, and the inductive mode of approach was triumphing in every field. Hobbes, 1588 to 1679, had carried out the skeptical spirit of the Renaissance and the practical spirit of his master into so complete and outspoken a materialism as would have won him in France the honor of martyrdom for a fallacy. Locke, 1632 to 1704, had written a masterpiece of psychological analysis, the Essay on the Human Understanding, 1689, without any supernatural assumptions. Collins, Tyndall, and other deists were reaffirming their faith in God while calling into question every other doctrine of the established church. Newton had just died. Voltaire attended the funeral and often recalled the impression made upon him by the national honors awarded to this modest Englishman. Not long ago, he writes, a distinguished company were discussing the trite and frivolous question, who is the greatest man, Caesar, Alexander, Tamerlane, or Cromwell? Someone answered that without doubt it was Isaac Newton, and rightly, for it is to him who masters our minds by the force of truth, and not to those who enslave them by violence, that we owe our reverence. Voltaire became a patient and thorough student of Newton's works, and was later the chief protagonist of Newton's views in France. One must marvel at the quickness with which Voltaire absorbed almost all that England had to teach him, its literature, its science, and its philosophy. He took all these varied elements, passed them through the fire of French culture and the French spirit, and transmuted them into the gold of Gallic wit and eloquence. He recorded his impressions in Letters on the English, which he circulated in manuscript among his friends. He did not dare to print them, for they praised perfidious Albion too highly to suit the taste of the royal censor. They contrasted English political liberty and intellectual independence with French tyranny and bondage. They condemned the idle aristocracy and the tithe-absorbing clergy of France, with their perpetual recourse to the Bastille as the answer to every question and every doubt. They urged the middle classes to rise to their proper, as these classes had in England. Without quite knowing or intending it, these letters. Cirey, the Romances. Nevertheless, the regent, not knowing of this Chanticleer, sent Voltaire permission in 1729 to return to France. For 5 years Voltaire enjoyed again that Parisian life whose wine flowed in his veins and whose spirit flowed from his pen. And then some miscreant of a publisher, getting hold of the letters on the English, turned them without the author's permission into print, and sold them far and wide, to the horror of all good Frenchmen, including Voltaire. The Parliament of Paris at once ordered the book to be publicly burned as scandalous, contrary to religion, to morals, and to respect for authority. And Voltaire learned that he was again on the way to the Bastille. Like a good philosopher, he took to his heels, merely utilizing the occasion to elope with another man's wife. The Marquise du Châtelet was 28. Voltaire, alas, was already 40. She was a remarkable woman. She had studied mathematics with the redoubtable. She had written a learnedly annotated translation of Newton's Principia. She was soon to receive higher rating than Voltaire in a contest for a prize offered by the French Academy for an essay on the physics of fire. In short, she was precisely the kind of woman who never elopes. But the Marquis was so dull, and Voltaire was so interesting. A creature lovable in every way, she called him, the finest ornament in France. He returned her love with fervent admiration, called her a great man whose only fault was being a woman. Formed from her and from the large number of highly talented women then in France his conviction of the native mental equality of the sexes, and decided that her chateau at Cirey was an admirable refuge from the inclement political weather of Paris. The Marquis was away with his regiment, which had long been his avenue of escape from mathematics, and he made no objection to the new arrangements. Because of the mariage de convenance, which forced rich old men on young women who had little taste for senility but much hunger for romance, the morals of the day permitted a lady to add a lover to her ménage, if it were done with a decent respect for the hypocrisies of mankind. And when she chose not merely a lover, but a genius, all the world forgave her. In the chateau at Cirey, they did not spend their time billing and cooing. All the day was taken up with study and research. Voltaire had an expensive laboratory equipped for work in natural science, and for years the lovers rivaled each other in discovery and disquisition. They had many guests, but it was understood that these should entertain themselves all day long till supper at 9. After supper, occasionally, there were private theatricals, or Voltaire would read to the guests one of his lively stories. Very soon Cirey became the Paris of the French mind. The aristocracy and the bourgeoisie joined in the pilgrimage to taste Voltaire's wine and wit, and see him act in his own plays. He was happy to be the center of this corrupt and brilliant world. He took nothing too seriously, and for a while made rire et faire rire, to laugh and to make laugh, his motto. Catherine of Russia called him the divinity of gaiety. If nature had not made us a little frivolous, he said, we should be most wretched. It is because one can be frivolous that the majority do not hang themselves. There was nothing of the dyspeptic Carlyle about him. Dulce est desipere in loco. It is sweet to be foolish on occasion. Woe to the philosophers who cannot laugh away their wrinkles. I look upon solemnity as a disease. It was now that he began to write those delightful romances, Comme il va, etc., which gave the Voltairean spirit in purer form than anything else in his 99 volumes. They are not novels, but humoresque, picaresque novelettes. The heroes are not persons, but ideas. The villains are superstitions, and the events are thoughts. Some are mere fragments, like L'Ingenue, which is Rousseau before Jean-Jacques. A Huron Indian comes to France with some returning explorers. The first problem to which he gives rise is that of making him a Christian. An abbé gives him a copy of the New Testament, which the Huron likes so much that he soon offers himself not only for baptism, but for circumcision as well. For, he says, I do not find in the book that was put into my hands a single person who was not circumcised. It is therefore evident that I must make a sacrifice to the Hebrew custom, and the sooner the better. Hardly has this difficulty been smoothed over when he has trouble over confession. He asks where in the Gospel this is commanded, and is directed to a passage in the Epistle of St. James. Confess your sins to one another. He confesses, but when he had done, he dragged the abbé from the confessional chair, placed himself in the seat, and bade the abbé confess in turn. Come, my friend, it is said, we must confess our sins to one another. I have related my sins to you, and you shall not stir till you recount yours. He falls in love with Miss Saint-Yves, but is told that he cannot marry her because she has acted as godmother at his baptism. He is very angry at this little trick of the fates and threatens to get unbaptized. Having received permission to marry her, he is surprised to find that for marriage, notaries, priests, witnesses, contracts, and dispensations are absolutely necessary. You are then very great rogues, since so many precautions are required. And so, as the story passes on from incident to incident, the contradictions between primitive and ecclesiastical Christianity are forced upon the stage. One misses the impartiality of the scholar and the leniency of the philosopher, but Voltaire had begun his war against superstition, and in war we demand impartiality and leniency only of our foes. Micromegas is an imitation of Swift, but perhaps richer than its model in cosmic imagination. The Earth is visited by an inhabitant from Sirius. He is some 500,000 feet tall, as befits the citizen of so large a star. On his way through space, he has picked up a gentleman from Saturn, who grieves because he is only a few thousand feet in height. As they walk through the Mediterranean, the Syrian wets his heels. He asks his comrade how many senses the Saturnians have, and is told, "We have 72, but we are daily complaining of the smaller number." To what age do you commonly live? Alas, a mere trifle. Very few on our globe survive 15,000 years. So you see that in a manner we begin to die the very moment we are born. Our existence is no more than a point, our duration an instant, and our globe means before we can... The Syrian poisons it on his thumbnail. Repeated exorcisms, the sailors swore, and the philosophers...
No, that was like last time watching that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, like that was like totally a throwback.
That might only Space Jam 2 for a while.
Oh,
yeah, but it's gonna suck. You can't do it like they did in the 90s.
It's gonna suck because it's gonna have LeBron James.
Without doubt, your joys on this earth must be pure and exquisite.
Well, not
For being
LeBron James.
unencumbered with matter, and to all appearance little else than soul,
Kobe
you
Bryant.
must spend your lives in the delights of
You can
play
tell how
and
much I'm into
reflection,
basketball.
which are the true enjoyments of a perfect spirit. True happiness I have nowhere found, but certainly here it dwells. We have matter enough, answered one of the
Funny
philosophers,
enough,
to do
I
abundance of
rented a pack of
mischief.
cigarettes
You
from
must
the
know,
river.
for example, that at this very
I knew he
moment
had
while I'm
smokes,
speaking,
and
there are 100,000
I
animals of our own
haven't gone to the
species
store
covered
yet
with
today, and
hats,
I'm out of cigarettes,
slain
so
an
I
equal
just
number of their
figured
fellow
I'd take
creatures
like,
who wear
I'm taking the rest
turbans.
of this pack of
At
cigarettes.
least they
Here's
are either
$5.
slain
Like,
or being
I'll give you
slain.
the rest back.
And this has usually been the case all over the earth from time immemorial. Miscreants, cried the indignant Syrian. I have a good mind to take 2 or 3 steps and trample the whole nest of such ridiculous... Don't give yourself the trouble, replied the philosopher. They are industrious enough in securing their own destruction. At the end of 10 years, the 100th part of these wretches will not survive. Besides, the punishment should not be inflicted upon them, but upon those sedentary and slothful barbarians who, from their palaces, give orders for murdering 1 million of men, and then solemnly thank God for their success. Next to Candide, which belongs to a later period of Voltaire's life, the best of these tales is Zadig. Zadig was a Babylonian philosopher. As wise as it is possible for men to be, he knew as much of metaphysics as had ever